In a remote area, far from the busy streets and endless traffic, Mrs. Parker lives alone, but she has a tenant in a barn, Clay, who leads a quiet life as a beekeeper. One day, while managing her finances, Mrs. Parker receives a notification of a virus on her laptop. She calls the number displayed, which connects her to a phishing company. The ringleader, Garnet, takes the opportunity to set an example for his trainees. He assures Mrs. Parker that the notification comes from the pre-installed package on her laptop and advises her to update it. Since Mrs. Parker isn't tech-savvy, Garnet offers to help her remotely, asking her to download a program called Friendly Friend that grants him access. As she does this, Garnet mutes the call and displays Mrs. Parker's checking, life insurance, pension, and a charity account with $2 million on the company's screens. Garnet initiates strip mining of the accounts, but Mrs. Parker doesn't suspect anything. Garnet assures her it's all normal. As compensation for the inconvenience, he promises to refund her the subscription fee, supposedly transferring it to her account. To verify the transfer, she logs in and sees a transfer of $50,000, part of Garnet's scheme. Using sympathy, Mrs. Parker is baited into using the master password to wire the money back, but this is where Garnet strikes, emptying all her accounts in an instant, a great win for him. When Mrs. Parker's screen comes back on, all her accounts are emptied. She can't believe it. Her phone starts alerting her about fraudulent activities, and the cruel realization slowly sets in. Meanwhile, Clay is extracting honey, setting aside a jar for Mrs. Parker. In the evening, he visits her to hand it over, but no one answers the door, so he lets himself in. The fire alarm is blaring, and something feels off. Walking into the next room, he finds a fired gun. He's suddenly ambushed and ordered to drop to his knees by Verona, Mrs. Parker's daughter. Clay expresses his sympathy to her. Mrs. Parker has taken her own life. At this point, Clay becomes the main suspect, but Verona refuses to accept her mother committed suicide. He calmly answers the agent's questions, explaining that he was just bringing her a jar of honey. His story checks out, as he's a beekeeper. When Verona checks her mother's accounts, she realizes this might have been the reason for her mother's drastic action. With GSR negative and Mrs. Parker's fingerprints on the gun, there is only one explanation. Verona apologizes for being harsh, but her reaction is understandable. To learn more about the person her mother lived with, she invites Clay for a cup of coffee. Verona reveals that Clay reminded her mother of Verona's deceased brother, a former Marine raider. Mrs. Parker always praised him more for mowing the lawn than her for graduating from the FBI Academy. Verona then reveals that someone emptied all her mother's accounts. She was scammed. Verona spoke with an agent from the cybercrimes office, who said the crew that scammed Mrs. Parker had been operating for years and they still didn't have their names. She's pessimistic about ever bringing them to justice. Clay compares stealing from the elderly to hurting a child, but worse, as there's no one to protect them. It often goes unnoticed or uncared for. Verona, however, swears to seek retribution. Clay takes his leave, needing to care for his hive. Also seeking justice for Mrs. Parker, Clay contacts a secret group of beekeepers he retired from, asking for a favor in finding Garnet's crew. Not long after, Clay receives the address of the scammers, a call center run by Garnet. Arriving with 2 gas canisters, he's stopped by security, who tell him to leave, but he's there to burn the place down. Dismantling them with ease, he makes his way inside and grabs everyone's attention, asking them to repeat after him, "I will never steal from the weak and vulnerable again." But he's only met with laughter. There are other ways to make his point clear. This time, no one's laughing. After they repeat the oath, he ensures they keep the promise by pouring gasoline everywhere. Garnet tries to stop him, but Clay, an ex-special agent, handles the security guards easily and places bombs on the gas canisters, set to trigger from the next call made to the center. As another family calls the center about the virus, Clay is already out, and the place explodes. At Danforth Enterprises in Boston, the spoiled Derek Danforth receives a call from Garnet, explaining how Clay tore through security like a hot knife through butter and burned the place to the ground. A $30 million building is now just a pile of rubble. The worst part is, they have no clue who did it. Derek needs to take charge of the situation. He consults his advisor, a former CIA operative, asking if he can locate and deal with Clay, but the advisor declines to get involved. No big deal. Derek instructs Garnet to log into the cloud and search for anyone connected to their recent deals, then go American Gangster on that person. Hesitantly, Garnet agrees to handle it. Later, Verona arrives at the scene, and while no one can identify the perpetrator, she quietly celebrates a small victory against these criminals. Back to his usual routine, Clay enjoys his beekeeping, but it's just the calm before the storm. Garnet and his mercenaries arrive at Mrs. Parker's place, spotting Clay driving away. Seeking revenge, Garnet decides to destroy Clay's beehives. Hearing the gunshots, Clay activates machines to mask the noise and hides in the shadows, causing the mercenaries to fire prematurely. One by one, Clay takes them down. The bad guys never learn not to split up. Left alone and panicking, Garnet realizes it's over. Clay cuts off Garnet's fingers, leaving him alive to send a message. During the investigation, Verona receives a notification about a fire at her mother's house. She discovers that the bodies found are linked to the same company involved in the scam. The pieces start to fit together for the agents. Clay is responsible. Garnet, stopped on a bridge, calls Derek, interrupting his mundane activities, expecting good news but instead sharing a tale of disaster. As Garnet explains that Clay is like a beekeeper ninja, Clay suddenly drags Garnet out of the car, straps him up, and sends him off the bridge. Picking up the phone, Clay tells Derek he's next, sending chills down Derek's spine. Derek, shaken, goes to Wallace, explaining that a crazed beekeeper has destroyed one of his 20 call centers. Wallace, realizing the severity, is shocked. He knows Derek has made a serious mistake, unaware of the illegal aspects of his business. Derek doesn't understand why Wallace is so afraid of that nobody. Wallace clarifies that the nobody is a beekeeper, a man of focus, commitment, and sheer will, qualities Derek lacks. Wallace, a former CIA director, assures Derek that there's nothing he can do to help. The FBI starts piecing the puzzle together and realizes there must be a ringleader behind all these fraudulent call centers. What's more mysterious is Clay. He's like a ghost. All they have is his birth certificate, suggesting he's part of a classified program. Jessica calls Wallace, begging him to protect her son, promising more shares in the company. That's all Wallace needed to hear. He contacts an old CIA line, explaining the situation, catching the attention of the beekeeper program. The manager informs Wallace that Clay is a retired agent and that the current active beekeeper will handle things. However, Wallace remains uneasy. As Clay contemplates by his honey, his car is rammed from behind. A woman with a gun starts shooting, but Clay is already out of the vehicle. The police are of no concern to her, and as Clay subdues her, she finds it amusing. They fight, but she struggles to match Clay's unarmed skills. She resorts to using a minigun, blasting the gas station. Clay throws a jar of honey at her, setting her on fire, then cuts off her finger before driving off. The beekeepers declare neutrality, leaving Wallace without support. The FBI catches up with Clay's trail, finding Garnet's body and arriving at the gas station scene. The woman, like Clay, is a ghost. The only clue is her book about beekeeping. The agents deduce that Clay is heading to Boston. Wallace gathers ex-military personnel, explaining that a secret organization, unknown even to the CIA director, has been operating from the shadows for decades. The beekeepers have complete autonomy and resources, but now a retired beekeeper has gone rogue, not acting in the hive's best interest. Wallace emphasizes that, compared to a beekeeper, the former Special Forces personnel are like children, but maybe, with enough of them, they have a chance. Using the woman's severed finger, Clay accesses her facility, taking her arsenal and intelligence. He tracks down Derek's base of operations and stocks up on supplies, preparing to fulfill his promise to Derek. Verona informs the FBI deputy director that 3 crime scenes are linked to Clay, who is connected to a classified program named Beekeeper. She reveals that Clay is heading to Boston, targeting 9 Star United, which oversees all of Derek's global scam call centers. The director, having heard enough, grants the agents full funding to deal with Clay, a rare occurrence. The FBI SWAT team storms the building, but the private security has it on lock. They settle for a perimeter outside. The team searches for other entrances but finds none. Clay confirms that if there were any, he would have used them. He doesn't want to injure anyone unnecessarily, but the SWAT team leaves him no choice. Surrounded, he somehow neutralizes 15 armed men and, taking one hostage, walks through the front. Inside, the mercenary commander, Pettis, tries to evacuate unarmed personnel, but the ringleader, Golden Goose, arrogantly refuses and calls Derek, who chastises Pettis for not doing his job properly. No one will evacuate. As they applaud the armed men leaving, Clay is among them. Throwing a guy around, he silences the floor, but Golden Goose still doesn't grasp the situation. When Pettis's men start shooting, Golden Goose quickly kisses the floor. Clay manages to escape to the hallway and climbs up to the ceiling. Using one of Pettis's men as bait, he deals with two more. To mask the sound, he triggers the fire alarm and pounces on Pettis, neutralizing a few more before disarming him. Grabbing a fire extinguisher, Clay blinds Pettis and knocks him out. With more agents on the street, Verona orders them to move in. Clay sets up wires for his next plan. Just as the mercenaries think they have him cornered in an elevator, he blows the cable, taking down those who ran out with the elevator. Crashing at the bottom, the agents prefer to take the stairs. With the mercenary chain of command in disarray, they become easy targets for Clay in the dark. With all of them dead, Golden Goose is next. Using a stapler as a torture device, Clay demands to know who's above him, explaining that it's all because they messed with the only person who ever cared for him. Golden Goose finally cracks, revealing the top players in the operation. Verona arrives and speaks directly with Clay, assuring him that there are laws for these matters, but Clay insists that some things can't be fixed by laws, only by him. He escapes as more agents arrive, and for now, they settle for capturing Golden Goose and his crew. Looking at the laptop, Verona now also knows who Clay's target is. At a luxurious restaurant, Derek is worried sick, and Wallace receives the dire news that his mercenaries are all dead. Maybe it's time to call Derek's mother. Clay can't act if they are near Jessica and her people. Derek likes the idea and calls his mother, without mentioning Clay, asking if he can visit. She agrees. It turns out Jessica is the President of the United States. No way Clay can target the Queen Bee, right? Verona's agent friend suggests that maybe they should let Clay handle it, but Verona can't, even if it seems like the right thing to do. Verona informs the FBI deputy director that Clay is following the money. 9-Star United uses data mining software to identify people with no heirs or family, targeting their assets. Another company involved, which several U.S. government agencies use, is also operated by Danforth Enterprises, founded and run by Jessica Danforth, who recently stepped down because she was sworn in as the president. They are the only three who know this, and the deputy director wants to keep it that way. Jessica's association with the scam means she might also be a target. At the Danforth Beach House, security is tight, but Verona is there to make it tighter. Derek is already there, having a beer, but Wallace is still panicking, thinking that even this many Secret Service agents might not be enough to stop one man. Wallace has hired the most elite team he could think of. Yellow, who once killed a beekeeper, is among them, though it cost him dearly. Jessica is furious that no one informed her of the stakes. The Secret Service goes so far as to weld shut every manhole around the estate and thoroughly checks every vehicle that comes through. Clay makes his way into the sewer system. The welded lid doesn't stop him. He opens the manhole, hops on a skateboard, and makes his way to a car in front. An agent spots Clay, but before he can sound the alarm, Clay incapacitates him and takes his uniform, giving him the perfect disguise to waltz in. With Yellow's kill squad arriving, the place is possibly the most secure location on Earth. Not even Rambo could break through, unless he had timed explosives. Changing into a suit, Clay blends in with the guests. Verona sees the deputy director speaking with the president, understanding that she's learning the truth. Grabbing her son, they go into a private room, where only the three of them remain. The deputy director confronts the family about illegal money, and Jessica defers to Derek as the head of the business. This makes Derek uneasy. Spotting his targets, Clay is noticed by Verona, who notifies the Secret Service that Clay is in the house. The kill squad moves into action. With all guns on him, Clay appears to surrender. But what's in his hand? Wallace gives a signal for an execution, but Clay has other plans. The explosion of nearby cars provides enough distraction for Clay to shoot a few guards and make his way inside. Yellow is still in the fight. Clay, wanting to minimize deaths, takes an agent hostage to secure safe passage. In the yard, he systematically takes down the kill squad members, moving toward the main target. As tensions rise, Jessica blames Derek for everything, revealing that without the illegal funding, she wouldn't have won the election. Jessica claims ignorance of the money's origins, while Derek admits he just needed to get the job done. Clay skillfully navigates the agents without anyone managing to shoot him. Jessica decides to confess everything to Clay and the world about Derek's use of the data mining software, even if it ruins her. As Clay approaches the room where Derek and the others are, Yellow intercepts him. They engage in a brutal fight, but Clay, like a relentless force, prevails. Verona might be the only person Clay feels any sympathy for. As she tends to Wallace's wounds, he tells Clay he has made his point and can still walk away to live a quiet life. But it's personal for Clay, and he's here to right the wrongs. Clay plants a claymore on the door and sits Wallace down. As Clay is about to enter, Derek shoots the deputy director and takes his mother hostage just as Clay blows the door. Verona also enters, creating a standoff. Clay tells Verona to choose between the law and justice. He shoots Derek and makes his escape. The president is unharmed. Verona still has a clear shot at Clay but chooses justice. Clay gives her a final nod before slipping away, where he has a suit and swim gear stashed. He disappears into the night.